Marcus Chen adjusted his designer suit jacket and stepped out of the black Mercedes, his polished Italian leather shoes clicking against the familiar cobblestone driveway. The sprawling Victorian mansion loomed before him, its ornate windows, catching the afternoon sun like judgmental eyes. 10 years ago, he'd walked this same path every morning at dawn, carrying cleaning supplies and wearing a threadbare uniform. Today, he carried eviction papers. The irony wasn't lost on him. He pulled out his phone and scrolled to a contact labeled Property Manager, Whitmore Estate. His thumb hovered over the call button. After a decade of planning, scheming, and clawing his way up from nothing, this moment had finally arrived. Victoria Whitmore, the woman who had made his life hell for 10 years, was about to discover that her precious family estate now belonged to him. The wrought-iron gates stood open, just as they had that first day when 18-year-old Marcus had arrived desperate for work. Any work. To support his sick mother, Mrs. Whitmore had looked him up and down like he was something she'd scraped off her shoe, and handed him a mop and told him to try not to break anything valuable. Now, at 28, Marcus owned 17 properties. Across the city, including this one, the very one where Victoria Whitmore still lived, blissfully unaware that her monthly rent checks had been going directly into his pocket for the past 6 months. Marcus pocketed his phone and walked toward the front door, his steps measured and confident. Today wasn't about revenge, it was about justice. Victoria Whitmore was about to get a very expensive lesson in treating people with respect. 10 years? Earlier, the bucket was heavier than Marcus had expected, sloshing dirty water onto his already soaked sneakers as he lugged it down the mansion's marble hallway. His shoulders ached from scrubbing baseboards all morning, but he couldn't afford to show weakness. Not when his mother's medical bills were piling up, and this job was the only thing standing between them and eviction from their tiny apartment. Boy. Victoria Whitmore's voice cracked like a whip from the top of the grand staircase. What is that smell? As Marcus looked up to see her descending the stairs, her perfectly coiffed blonde hair catching the light from the crystal chandelier. Even at 45, she moved with the predatory grace of someone who had never wanted for anything. Her silk blouse probably cost more than Marcus made in a month. It's just the cleaning solution, Mrs. Whitmore, he said, keeping his voice level despite the humiliation burning in his chest. Well, it's absolutely revolting. Use something else. She waved her manicured hand dismissively. And for heaven's sake, try to be quieter. I have important guests coming for lunch, and I can't have them thinking I employ common help. Common help. The words stung more than they should have. Marcus had graduated valedictorian from his high school just 3 months ago, had been accepted to several colleges with partial scholarships, but partial wasn't enough, not with his mother's cancer treatments draining their savings. Yes, ma'am, he replied, the words tasting like ash. Victoria's cold blue eyes swept over him like he was a stain on her expensive carpet. And Marcus, next time, use the service entrance. Here at the front door is for family and guests, not staff. They glided away toward the dining room, leaving behind the cloying scent of her perfume and the weight of her disdain. Marcus stood there for a moment, gripping the bucket handle until his knuckles went white. Someday, he promised himself. Someday, things would be different. He had no idea how prophetic that promise would prove to be. Present-day Marcus pressed the doorbell and listened to the familiar chimes echo through the mansion's halls. He'd heard that same melody thousands of times, usually followed by Victoria's sharp voice, ordering him to get the door and make sure you take their coats properly. Footsteps approached expensive heels on marble, the same sound that had haunted his dreams for years. The door swung open, and there she was. Victoria Whitmore had aged, though she'd fought it every step of the way. Her face was tighter now, pulled taut by what had to be multiple surgeries. Her blonde hair was still perfect, still styled in the same elaborate waves she'd favored a decade ago. But there were lines around her eyes that makeup couldn't quite hide, and something desperate lurking behind her practiced smile. Yes, she said, her tone already impatient. Then her gaze fell on Marcus's expensive suit, the Rolex on his wrist, the confident way he carried himself. Her expression shifted to confused interest. I'm sorry, do we know each other? Marcus savored the moment. 10 years of backbreaking work, of building his business from nothing, carefully orchestrating this exact scenario, it all came down to this. We do, actually, he said, his voice calm and professional, though I looked quite different the last time we met. I believe you preferred when I used the service entrance. Recognition dawned slowly across Victoria's features, like watching ice crack on a frozen lake. Her perfectly painted lips parted in shock, then pressed together in a thin line. Marcus, she breathed. Marcus Chen. What are you? Why are you? Here, business, he replied, pulling out a leather portfolio. I represent the new owner of this property. There are some matters we need to discuss regarding your tenancy. The color drained from Victoria's face. New owner? That's impossible. This house has been in my family for generations. My late husband left it to me free and clear. Marcus tilted his head, feigning sympathy. I'm afraid there's been some confusion. Mrs. Whitmore, may I come in? This conversation would be better suited to somewhere private. What do you think will happen next? Share your predictions in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more thrilling stories. Victoria stepped aside with jerky, robotic movements, her composure finally beginning to crack. Marcus walked through the front door she'd forbidden him to use for years, and into the opulent foyer that had once intimidated him so thoroughly. The mansion looked exactly the same. From the Persian rugs to the oil paintings, of Victoria's deceased ancestors glaring down from the walls, but Marcus felt different walking through it now. Where once he'd felt small and insignificant, now he felt like he belonged. The sitting room Victoria managed, leading him toward. A parlor furnished with antiques that probably cost more than most people's houses. Please, sit down and explain what this is about. Marcus settled into a velvet armchair when he'd cleaned countless times, but never been invited to sit in and opened his portfolio. As I mentioned, I represent the new owner of 1247 Beacon Hill Drive. This property was purchased 6 months ago when the previous owner defaulted on a rather substantial loan. That's impossible, Victoria repeated, but her voice had lost its characteristic authority. I own this house outright. There are no loans against it. Marcus pulled out a thick stack of documents and set them on the mahogany coffee table between them. I'm afraid that's not accurate, Mrs. Whitmore. Your late husband, Richard Whitmore, took out a series of loans against this property during the final years of his life. The total amount, including interest and penalties, came to just over $3 million. Victoria's hands trembled as she reached for the papers. Richard never told me about any loans. He said our finances were secure. According to these documents, Mr. Whitmore was attempting to cover significant losses from failed investments. When he passed away 2 years ago, the loans automatically transferred to you as his heir. Marcus watched her face pale further. The lending institution was quite patient. But after 18 months of missed payments, they had no choice but to foreclose. But I've been making mortgage payments, Victoria protested weakly. Every month, without fail. Those weren't mortgage payments, Mrs. Whitmore. Marcus leaned back in the chair, his tone remaining professionally neutral despite the satisfaction coursing through his veins. Those were rent payments. You've been a tenant in this house for the past 6 months, not the owner. The words hit Victoria like a physical blow. She sank deeper into her chair, the documents scattered across her lap like fallen leaves. Rent payments? To whom? Marcus smiled then, the expression cold and calculated. To me, Mrs. Whitmore, I'm the new owner. I'm your landlord. The silence that followed was deafening. Victoria's face cycled through emotion, shock, disbelief, anger, and finally dawning horror as the full implications hit her. You, she whispered, you bought my house? I bought the mortgage from the lending institution. Yes, this was a significant investment, but I felt it was worth it. Marcus pulled another document from his portfolio, which brings me to why I'm here today. I'm afraid I have some bad news regarding your tenancy. Victoria's eyes darted to the paper in his hands, and Marcus could see her mind racing, trying to find an escape from the trap that had been closing around her for months without her knowledge. You see, Mrs. Whitmore? There have been some complaints from the neighbors about noise violations, proper maintenance of the grounds, and several instances of what could be considered harassment of service workers. Marcus's voice remained steady, professional. According to the lease agreement you signed, though I suspect you didn't read it carefully, these constitute grounds for immediate eviction. Harassment of service workers? Victoria's voice cracked. What are you talking about? The pool cleaner you berated last month for tracking water on your precious marble? The grocery delivery boy you made wait outside in the rain because you didn't want his kind in your house? The landscaper you tried to pay below minimum wage because you assumed he was undocumented? Marcus enumerated each incident with clinical precision. All documented, all violations of your lease agreement. Victoria stood abruptly, her composure finally shattering completely. This is insane. You can't do this to me. I'll call my lawyer. By all means, Marcus replied, rising as well. But I think you'll find that everything here is perfectly legal. I've been very careful about that. 8 years earlier, the community college classroom was stuffy and overcrowded, filled with people like Marcus who were trying to better themselves while working full-time jobs. He sat in the back row, still in his uniform from the mansion, catching disapproving looks from some of the younger students. Clearly thought he didn't belong. His accounting textbook was used. The cover held on with duct tape, but the pages were pristine. Marcus had highlighted every important concept, made detailed notes in the margins, and studied until his eyes burned. His mother had been in remission for 6 months now, which meant he could finally think about the future instead of just surviving. Day to day, real estate can be an excellent investment vehicle, Professor Martinez was saying, but it requires significant capital and knowledge of market dynamics.
Ow.
Marcus's pen moved furiously across his notebook. He'd been thinking about property investment for months, ever since he'd overheard Victoria on the phone with her accountant, complaining about property taxes and maintenance costs. The way she talked about her tenants, those people who lived in the apartment buildings she'd inherited, had made his skin crawl. What if it was different? He'd wondered. What if someone who understood what it was like to struggle owned those properties instead? After class, Marcus approached Professor Martinez. Sir, what would someone need to get started in real estate investment? Pathetically speaking, the professor looked at Marcus's uniform, then at the determination in his young face. Well, it's not easy. You'd need capital, credit, knowledge of the market. But it's not impossible, especially for someone willing to start small and work their way up. Marcus nodded thoughtfully. And if someone wanted to acquire a specific property, something that might not be officially for sale? Professor Martinez raised an eyebrow. That's more complex. You'd need to understand the property's financial situation. Look for leverage, points and paid taxes, hidden liens, distressed owners. But Marcus, he added, his voice serious, whatever you're thinking, make sure it's legal. The best revenge is success, not destruction. Marcus had smiled then, filing away every word. He didn't want to destroy Victoria Whitmore. He wanted something much more satisfying than that. He wanted to prove that the common help she'd dismissed so casually could rise higher than she'd ever imagined. Present-day Victoria paced the sitting room like a caged animal, her heels clicking frantically on the hardwood floor. There has to be a mistake. Richard would never have put our home at risk. Never. Marcus watched her fall apart with the same clinical detachment he'd learned during his years building his business empire. No emotion, just facts and consequences. Mrs. Whitmore, he said gently, would you like to see the original loan documents? They're quite detailed. Your husband's signature is on every page. No. The word exploded from her lips. I don't want to see anything. I want you out of my house this instant. Your house. Marcus's voice remained calm, but there was steel. Underneath, I'm afraid that's no longer accurate. That brings me to the main reason for my visit today. He pulled out a final document from his portfolio, this one bearing an official seal. Victoria's eyes fixed on it like it was a coiled snake. What is that? She whispered. Your eviction notice. You have 30 days to vacate the premises. The words seemed to suck all the air out of the room. Victoria staggered backward, catching herself on the mantelpiece. The same mantelpiece where she used to set her wine glass while berating Marcus for not polishing the silver properly. 30 days? You can't be serious. This is my home. These are my things, my memories. Your belongings will be handled according to state law, Marcus interrupted. You'll have the opportunity to take your personal effects, of course. The furniture and fixtures, however, were included in the sale as they were used as collateral for your husband's loans. Victoria's face had gone from pale to gray. She looked around the room as if seeing it for the first time, taking in the antique furniture, the family portraits, the accumulated treasures of generations of Whitmores. Where am I supposed to go? The question came out as barely a whisper. Marcus pulled out his phone and scrolled through his contacts. Actually, I may be able to help with that. I own several rental properties throughout the city. Most of them are quite reasonable, displaying a photo of a small, modest apartment building in a working-class neighborhood. The kind of place where Victoria would be surrounded by the very people she'd spent her life looking down on. This unit just became available. It's a studio apartment, about 400 square feet. The rent is $1,200 per month, which should be manageable on your current income. Marcus paused, studying Victoria's horrified expression. You do have income, don't you, Mrs. Whitmore? The silence stretched between them like a chasm. Victoria's mouth opened and closed soundlessly, and Marcus realized with a jolt of satisfaction that she probably hadn't worked a day in her life. My husband left me an allowance, a trust fund. Ah, yes, I saw that in the financial documents. Unfortunately, that trust was also used as collateral for the loans. It's been frozen pending resolution of the estate's debts. Marcus tilted his head sympathetically. But don't worry. I'm sure someone with your extensive experience managing a household would have no trouble finding employment. The cruelty of the suggestion wasn't lost on either of them. Victoria Whitmore, who had never so much as made her own coffee, would have to find a job probably. The kind of service job she'd spent decades treating as beneath her notice. You planned this, she said suddenly, her voice gaining strength as anger replaced shock. This whole thing, you planned it from the beginning. Marcus considered the accusation. Planned to succeed, yes. I planned to build something meaningful. With my life, as for your husband's financial difficulties, well, I can hardly be blamed for his poor investment choices. But you knew. You had to have known when you bought the loans. I knew that an opportunity had presented itself. Yes. Marcus stood and began collecting his documents. The same way you knew that an 18-year-old boy desperate to pay his mother's medical bills would take whatever job he could get, no matter how you treated him. Victoria's face flushed red. That was different. I was, what? Poor. Young. Not worth basic human decency. Marcus's composure finally cracked, just a little. I was someone's son, Mrs. Whitmore. I was. Valedictorian of my high school class. I had dreams and ambitions and feelings just like you. But you never bothered to see that, did you? The accusation hung in the air between them. Victoria's mouth worked soundlessly, and for the first time in their acquaintance, she seemed to have no ready comeback. This isn't over, she finally managed. I'll fight this. I'll find a way to stop you. Marcus smiled, the expression sad rather than triumphant. Mrs. Whitmore, I've been preparing for this conversation for 8 years. Every document is in order. Every legal requirement met. There's nothing to fight. He walked toward the front door, then paused and turned back. Victoria stood in the center of the sitting room, surrounded by the opulence that was about to be. Stripped away, looking smaller and more fragile than he'd ever seen her. For what it's worth, Marcus said quietly, this isn't about revenge. It's about justice. And maybe, if you're willing to learn, it's about giving you a chance to understand what it's like to be on the other side. The tension is building. If you're enjoying this story, hit that like button and let me know in the comments which character you're rooting for. Your support helps me create more incredible stories like this one. 3 weeks later, Marcus stood in the grand foyer of the Whitmore mansion, watching the moving crew carefully wrap the last of the valuable artwork. Everything was being cataloged and stored not out of cruelty, but because even justice should have limits. The past 3 weeks had been a whirlwind. Victoria had indeed called her lawyer, then a second lawyer when the first one confirmed that Marcus's position was legally unassailable. She'd tried reaching out to old society friends for help, only to discover that many of them had their own financial troubles in the current economy. Most surprisingly, she'd actually shown up at one of Marcus's rental properties to view the studio apartment. Mr. Chen. Marcus turned to see Victoria standing in the doorway, looking almost unrecognizable. Gone were the designer clothes and perfect hair. Instead, she wore simple jeans and a modest sweater, her hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. She looked ... ordinary. Human. Mrs. Whitmore? I wasn't expecting to see you here today. I wanted to return these. She held out a set of keys, the keys to the mansion. And to ask you something. Marcus dismissed the moving crew with a gesture and waited. The apartment you showed me, Victoria continued, her voice quiet. Is it still available? It is. I'd like to take it, if the offer still stands. Marcus studied her face, looking for signs of manipulation or hidden agenda. But all he saw was exhaustion and something that might have been humility. What changed your mind? Victoria was quiet for a long moment, her eyes roaming over the mansions. Elegant details one last time. I spent the last 3 weeks trying to prove you wrong, trying to find a way out of this. But in the process, I learned some things about myself that I didn't like very much. She moved to the window that overlooked the garden where Marcus had spent countless hours maintaining the grounds. I called my neighbor Mrs. Patterson, the elderly woman next door. I was going to ask if I could stay with her temporarily. You know what she said? Marcus shook his head. She said she was surprised I was asking for help, since in 20 years of living next to each other, I'd never once offered help to anyone else. Not even when her husband was dying, and she could barely manage on her own. Victoria's voice cracked. Slightly, she was right. I realized I don't actually have any friends, Mr. Chen. I have acquaintances. People who tolerated me because of my money and social position. But no one who cares about me as a person. Marcus felt an unexpected stab of sympathy. I'm sorry to hear that. Are you? Victoria turned to face him directly. 'Cause you'd have every right not to be. I treated you terribly and I can't even claim I didn't know better. I knew exactly what I was doing. The admission hung between them like a bridge. Neither was sure they wanted to cross. Why are you telling me this? Marcus asked. Because I want to understand. How did you do it? How did you go from being my ... employee to owning this house and running a successful business? I need to know how to take care of myself, and I honestly don't have the first idea where to start. Marcus stared at her for a long moment. This was not the conversation he'd imagined having when he'd first conceived his plan for justice. He'd expected anger, denial, maybe even attempts at manipulation. But this vulnerable honesty was something he hadn't prepared for. It wasn't magic, he said finally. It was work. A lot of work. Night school, saving every penny, taking calculated risks, failing sometimes, and getting back up. Could you ... Victoria hesitated, then seemed to gather her courage. Could you teach me? I know I have no right to ask, and I know you owe me nothing. But I'm 47 years old, and I've never had a job or paid my own bills or managed my own life. I'm scared, Mr. Chen. Genuinely scared. Marcus walked to the mantelpiece where he'd watched Victoria set down countless wine glasses while she directed his work. The irony of the moment wasn't lost on him. The woman who had once treated him like furniture was now asking him to be her teacher. The apartment comes furnished, he said slowly. Basic furniture, nothing fancy. The lease is month to month, which means either of us can end it with 30 days' notice, I understand. The neighborhood is different from what you're used to. Working families, immigrants, people getting by paycheck to paycheck. They're good people, but they won't be impressed by your family name or your connections. I think that might be exactly what I need. Marcus made his decision. There's a community college nearby that offers job training programs, business skills, computer literacy, that kind of thing. If you're serious about learning to support yourself, that would be a good place to start. Victoria's eyes widened with something that might have been hope. You really think I could do it? Normal? Mrs. Whitmore, Marcus said, and for the first time in their acquaintance. His voice was genuinely kind. I think you might surprise yourself. 6 months later, Marcus pulled up to the small apartment building in his usual spot, but instead of going inside to collect rent, he sat in his car for a moment watching the building's entrance. It had become a monthly ritual, not just the rent collection, but checking on Victoria's progress. She emerged from the building at exactly 7:45 a.m., just as she had every weekday for the past 4 months. Gone forever was the pampered socialite who had never worked a day in her life. The woman walking toward the bus stop wore sensible shoes and carried a worn leather messenger bag, her hair in a simple style that required minimal maintenance. Victoria had gotten a job. It wasn't glamorous. She was a receptionist at a veterinary clinic, but she'd earned it herself. Marcus had watched her transformation with a mixture of satisfaction and genuine respect. The woman who had once berated service workers for the smallest infractions now spent her days helping anxious pet owners and learning to handle the clinic's basic administrative tasks. More importantly, she was good at it. Marcus's phone buzzed with a text message. He glanced down and smiled. "Monthly rent is ready, as always. Would you like to come up for coffee? I have news." He locked his car and headed into the building, taking the stairs to the second floor. Victoria's door was already open, and she was waiting with 2 cups of coffee and what looked like an official letter in her hands. "Mr. Chen, thank you for coming up." She gestured to the small dining table that served as both workspace and eating area. "I wanted to show you this." She handed him the letter, and Marcus's eyebrows rose as he read. It was an acceptance letter from the State University's business program, not just acceptance, but acceptance with a partial scholarship based on her work at the veterinary clinic and her community college grades. "Victoria, this is incredible. Congratulations." "I couldn't have done it without your help," she said, settling into the chair across from him. "And I don't just mean the apartment. You were right about the community college. Professor Martinez, you remember him? He's the one who encouraged me to apply to the university program." Marcus nearly choked on his coffee. "Professor Martinez is from accounting? You know him?" Victoria looked puzzled. He mentioned that he'd had a student years ago who'd gone on to build a very successful real estate business. Someone who'd overcome significant obstacles and never forgot where he came from. "I always wondered who that might have been." The irony was perfect. Professor Martinez, who had unknowingly helped Marcus plan his path to acquiring Victoria's mansion, had now helped Victoria plan her own path forward. "He's a good teacher," Marcus said simply. Victoria nodded, then grew serious. "Mr. Chen, Marcus, I need to ask you something, and I want you to know that your answer won't affect my plans. I'm going to do this program either way, but I need to know, was this part of your plan, helping me rebuild my life?" Marcus considered the question carefully. "Honestly, no. I plan to acquire your house and evict you. I plan to prove that the common help you dismissed could rise higher than you ever imagined, but helping you afterward, that wasn't part of the original plan. Then why did you do it?" Marcus looked around the small apartment that Victoria had transformed into a warm, comfortable home. She'd filled it with secondhand furniture and library books, photographs from her new job, and a small herb garden growing on the windowsill. It was nothing like the opulent mansion she'd lost, but it felt more genuine than anything in that cold, perfect house ever had. "Because I realized that my real victory wasn't taking your house," he said. "It was proving that everyone deserves a chance to grow and change and become better than they were, even you." Victoria's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. "Thank you for everything, for the second chance I didn't deserve, and for showing me that it's never too late to learn how to be a decent human being." Marcus raised his coffee cup in a mock toast. "Here's to new beginnings." "And 2 old debts paid in full," Victoria added, clinking her cup against his. The dedication ceremony for the Marcus Chen Community Learning Center was held on a bright spring morning, with representatives from the city council, the community, college, and dozens of residents from the surrounding neighborhoods in attendance. Marcus stood at the podium, looking out at the crowd gathered in front of the renovated building that had once been a neglected warehouse. "Education changed my life," he said into the microphone, his voice carrying clearly across the assembled crowd. "It gave me the tools to rise above my circumstances and build something meaningful. The center exists to provide those same tools to anyone who wants them, regardless of their background or financial situation." In the third row, Victoria applauded enthusiastically. Her business degree finally complete and her new position as the center's program coordinator secure. She'd been instrumental in securing funding and community support for the project, using skills she never knew she possessed. After the ceremony, as the crowd dispersed and maintenance crews began setting up for the evening celebration, Victoria approached Marcus with a small, wrapped package. "A housewarming gift," she said, handing it to him. "For the center." Marcus unwrapped it carefully and found himself holding a framed photograph of the Whitmore mansion, not as the cold, imposing structure it had been, but as Marcus had transformed it. The mansion now served as transitional housing for families, getting back on their feet, with job training programs and childcare services operating out of the converted common areas. "I thought you might like to remember what we built together," Victoria said quietly. Marcus studied the photograph, then looked at the woman who had become, against all odds, his most trusted collaborator in helping their community. "We did build something, didn't we? We built something better than either of us could have imagined alone." Marcus smiled and hung the photograph in the center's main office, where it would remind everyone who entered that transformation was always possible, that justice could be merciful, and that the most satisfying victories were the ones that lifted everyone up instead of tearing anyone down. Outside, the spring sun shone down on a neighborhood where former employers and employees had become partners, where mansions had become community resources, and where second chances had bloomed into something beautiful and lasting. It was, Marcus reflected, a genuinely happy ending for everyone involved. 5 years later, the morning sun streamed through the tall windows of Chen and Associates real estate development, casting long shadows across Marcus's corner office. At 33, he'd built an empire that spanned 3 cities, but his favorite project remained the community center that had started it all. A soft knock interrupted his review of the quarterly reports. "Come in." Victoria entered, carrying 2 cups of coffee and wearing the confident smile of someone who had found her true calling. As his business partner and the director of community outreach, she'd helped expand their model to 12 neighborhoods, creating affordable housing and job training programs that had transformed entire communities. The Henderson family just got the keys to their first home, she said, settling into the chair across from his desk. "That's 47 families we've helped transition from renters to homeowners this year." Marcus accepted the coffee gratefully. Mrs. Henderson was one of our first tenants, wasn't she? At the old Maple Street building? Yes. Single mother, working 2 jobs, thought she'd never own anything. Victoria's eyes sparkled with pride. "She starts her nursing program next month." 8. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, 2 people who had traveled impossible distances from where they'd started. Marcus's phone buzzed with a text message, and he glanced down to see a photo from his mother, now cancer-free for 8 years standing, in the garden of the small house he'd bought her in a quiet suburb. "Proud of you every day," the message. "Reed, you know what I was thinking about this morning?" Victoria said, setting down her cup. "That first day when you showed up with the eviction notice, I was so angry, so scared. I thought my life was ending." "In a way it was," Marcus replied. "Your old life anyway. The best thing that ever happened to me was losing that mansion." Victoria laughed, the sound genuine and warm. "I was suffocating in all that privilege and never even knew it. Everything except the one thing that actually mattered." "Which was?" "Purpose. The knowledge that I was making a difference, that my existence meant something beyond just ... existing." Marcus nodded, understanding completely. His phone rang, and he glanced at the caller. "ID Professor Martinez, now retired but still there. Go-to consultant for new educational programs." "I should take this," Marcus said, but Victoria was already standing. "I'll let you handle business." "But Marcus..." She paused at the door. "Thank you. Not just for the second chance, but for showing me that redemption isn't something you're given, it's something you earn every single day." After she left, Marcus answered the call and spent 20 minutes discussing curriculum development for their newest learning center. When he hung up, he walked to the window that overlooked the city where he'd once cleaned floors and been treated like he was invisible now. From his office, high above the streets, he could see the buildings he owned, the communities he'd helped revitalize, the lives he'd touched. But more importantly, he could see the future construction cranes marking the sites of new, affordable housing developments. Young families walking to the community centers, former tenants who were now homeowners. His assistant's voice came through the intercom. "Mr. Chen, there's a young man here to see you. Says he's looking for work, any kind of work. He seems ... desperate." Marcus smiled and straightened his tie. "Send him in, and ask Victoria to join us, would you? I think this might be exactly the kind of person we've been looking for." Some stories Marcus had learned weren't about ending cycles of pain and humiliation. They were about transforming those cycles into something beautiful, turning the energy of old wounds into the power to heal others. The best kind of justice, he reflected as he prepared to meet another young person in need of a chance, wasn't about getting even. It was about getting better, and then helping others do the same. What did you think of this thrilling journey? Share your favorite moment in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss our latest tales. What kind of story would you like to hear next?